Still for students. I also sent the flyer to other students who would like to sit in. But sometimes, yeah, quite challenging starting the lectures on 7.
Oh yeah, I understand. I understand. Yeah.
Very, yeah, but anyway, yeah, we have to schedule in very early morning. Yeah. So maybe we can wait for 2 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sure.
All right, all right.
Okay.
If we need to give a kind of, how to say, assignment for students.
Oh yeah, for the assignment, for the assignment, probably because this is week 3, so in week 4 I will give some assignment. In week 4, I will send the link to the assignment to the students next week.
All right.
So yeah.
And maybe you can give the introduction maybe by the end of the lecture about the assignment. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
The student can. Yeah.
So the notes can be downloaded from the site that I share in the chat.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
if they want to download, you can go there.
Sure. I also said to the students already.
Oh, okay.
No problem there. And for this year, especially in our research group for environmental chemistry, we have 15 students. So around 4 with under my supervision, maybe 4 with Dr. Hendrawan in hydrogel field, and also maybe 2 students in the computational chemistry, or QSR modeling. And as I mentioned in our lesson plan, the rest of this lecture will be the exercise for students to practice how to use the QSR for predicting, for evaluating the toxicity of certain chemical. And the rest of other students, for their final project will be work in the bionutrient project. Yeah, it is already distributed. So in my case, I'm still working on the composite membrane composite. So later maybe the draft almost ready, Dr. Wenda. If also you have great availability, please kindly support us to give the comment.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and the previous one, now we are working for revisions, and still I'm looking forward to the facility for checking the zeta potential measurement, especially for membrane in other research institute. Hopefully it's available. If not, maybe one time next month, if I have a chance to visit USM to Proclaim, maybe I will bring the sample.
Yeah, sure. I will check and see. We have zeta potential.
Very nice.
Very nearby a chemistry school, but then I'm not sure whether it is working or not because sometimes it's under maintenance. But I will check. Yeah, I will check.
Yeah, it's nice. Hopefully, we can use that facility. All right, since it's already 7:05, so very good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our visiting professor class. Today we have Dr. Wenda again to continue our lectures as we schedule in our previous informations and also provided in the flyer. Today we will move to the lecture 3 with the topic about Toxicokinetic and Toxicodynamic. I guess this is one of the most important part, on the environmental toxicology studies. So Dr. Wenda will deliver the lectures. Please prepare your notes. And again, if you have any questions, you can directly write your questions in the chat box, or even you just raise hand, and Dr. Wenda will be very happy to reply or to respond your questions and comment. So Dr. Wenda, without any further ado, I give the time for you, please.
Okay, thank you so much for this lecture. Yeah, today we want to talk about lecture 3, more on toxicokinetics and toxicodynamics. So generally today's lecture will be a mix of biology and chemistry, because if you look at this the area of toxicology, a lot of things deals with the toxic effect, which is more on the biological side. So as a chemist, we want to look into how a toxicant can interact with all these kind of biological things, like for example our tissue, our cells, and so on. So yeah, so this is what we are going to cover as what I've shown you previously. So we are in week 3 now. So in week 4 we are going to have an assignment. This assignment is not going to be very difficult. It's more on questions. Okay. For the first assignment, I will give like questions and answers. So you have to answer the questions based on whatever I ask, right? It is very simple, right? I don't know whether it's graded or not, but I will discuss with Dr. Fitri to see how we can actually assess your understanding on the topics. Okay, so before we start, just a bit of a recap of our last week's lecture. So last week we had a recorded lecture, right? So we talked about dose response relationship. So we actually look into this dose response relationship here, like this graph, right? Whereby it is actually a plot of response versus dose, right? And then we look into how we can actually interpret this kind of data. We have a lot of data concerning the relationship between the dose and the end effect, right, or the response. And then from the data itself, we can actually find what is the lethal dose 50. That means 50% of the population has suffered from the effect of the pollutant. And then we also look into what is something called the effective dose and toxic dose, right? So this one, if you want to know further details, you can actually watch back the previous recorded lecture, right? So for today's lecture, we are going to look into something different. Okay, we are going to look into first to describe the phases of toxicosis, right? Phases like exposure phase, and we have the toxicokinetic phase and the toxicodynamic phase. Then we want to look into how we can actually describe how this toxicant can interact with the cell, right? And then we want to summarize the routes of toxicant absorption. And after that, we want to look into the distribution. So basically, we are going to have some introduction, right? Some introduction of what is this toxicokinetics and what is toxicodynamics. And then after that, we are going to look into two specific things. One is absorption, right? And the other one is after absorption, what happens, which is distribution, right? So only these two we are going to cover. And then next week, we will proceed with the things like metabolism, and the other one is excretion, right? Yeah, this is the 3 phases of in toxicology. We have exposure phase, okay, which means the toxicant is exposed to our maybe skin, right? Maybe our respiratory systems, or maybe through ingestion, right? So the other one is toxicokinetics, right? Whereby it is concerning absorption. And then we have distribution, and then we have metabolism and excretion. So today's lecture will be focusing on these two, right? In a more detailed explanation in the later part of this lecture. Then next week, we are going to look a bit into the metabolism, excretion, and some other topics. Another one, it will be the toxicodynamics, right? As one of the 3 phases, right? Okay, so let's talk about exposure phase, right? Exposure phase basically means the bioavailability, which means that we are talking about the dose, okay, the fraction of dose that are available for absorption. We're talking about like toxicant, for example, chemicals that can be absorbed by our body and eventually move into the target organ, which will cause a toxic end effect, right? So for this exposure, some of the main factors that affects this exposure would be time and frequency of exposure, whether it is acute or chronic, or the other one is the route of administration, which means that whether it is through respiratory, skin, or by injection, right? So for animal, many different kind of places whereby exposure can happen. We have oral, we have lung, skin, and even injection. Injection means that, for example, if you look at a toxicology study, whereby we are using animal as one of the so-called test subject, right? So when we want to, let's say, look into an effect, okay, of a certain chemicals into a certain organ in that animals. So sometimes scientists prefer to inject the toxicant into that organ itself, right? This is because sometimes if you administer the toxicant to the animal during lab study, what you will see is that this toxicant may be metabolized, right? It can be degraded into something else, and eventually you'll see that the concentration of the toxicant in the target organ is not as high as what you expect, right? So it depends on the toxicant, the characteristic of the toxicant, but sometimes animal study injection is preferred, right? For plants you have roots, you have leaf as the site of exposure. Yeah, so roots, as you know, can transport water, right, through their cell, right? So if you have toxicant in the plant, you can also uptake this toxicant, right? One example for plant transport, right? Plant to be exposed, right? So if you look at constructed wetland, right? One example is a constructed wetland, whereby we have this almost everywhere near the riverbank, right? So the constructed wetland has it is actually man-made, engineered at that particular area, so that it has a lot of these plants, right? For example, this what you call as a cattail, right? So all these plants, they can actually absorb, right, pollutants. The reason why we construct the constructed wetland, because we want to ensure that these plants absorb all the pollutant before the water is released into the environment, right? So yeah, root can be a part of the plant to absorb all these pollutants. The other one is leaf. Leaf would be like in plants. If you look at the structure, right, the anatomy of the leaves, right, you'll see that they have this something called a stoma, right? This stoma can actually open and close depending on the availability of water, and sometimes it depends on the hormone that they have, right? So sometimes this leaf can actually open, right? The stoma can actually open and allows transfer between the toxicant into the leaf itself. Okay, this is one of the method, okay, in the leaf, right? Method that some people use sometimes to introduce antibodies to the plants, right? If you look at the in store, right, sometimes they sell something called antibiotics for plants, right? Whereby what you need to do is you just need to spray it on the leaf, right? So this leaf will absorb all those things. Okay, so in terms of exposure, some of the things that are quite important is one is the dose, right? Exposure is dependent on the how much you're exposed to. If you have been exposed to a lot of chemicals, a lot of the toxicant, of course, you suffer higher effects, okay, compared to the people who are exposed to maybe just a fraction of that. You also look into physical and chemical form of the toxicant, like the particle size. Okay, you can have large particle size. If it's a large particle size, then of course absorption will not likely happen. But if you have very small particle size, right? Small particle size, like for example, every year for the past few years, right? Sometimes in Malaysia we will have haze, right? This haze is caused by a lot of small particles. Right? These small particles, sometimes they are small enough to to be absorbed by human, right? So this is one of the toxicant that we consider as one of the classical toxicant that can actually cause a certain respiratory problem to human, right? So we also look into solubilization as part of the chemical form, right? So solubilization means that whether it is soluble in water or not. Usually, a toxicant that is soluble in water is much preferred, okay, because it is less toxic, because we can actually excrete out this kind of toxicant from our body easily compared to those that are soluble in lipids, right? So the other one is host-related factor. Okay, host-related factor as one of the reason for these factors for exposure. Okay, whether the exposure can actually cause significant harmful effects or not depends on the host itself. Okay, which means that if the host is very healthy, right, then of course the exposure will be less critical. But if the host is like someone that's like very old with poor immune system, then of course he will suffer from this exposure itself, right? So there are many cases whereby there are people who are immunocompromised, which means that their immune systems are not working very well. Then when they're exposed to just a small amount of substance, right, then they will start to feel a lot of effects, right? Of course, in our population, we also have like hypersensitive people, right, whereby they have excessive they have less tolerance and excessive problem when exposed to small amount of pollutant, right? Because their body cannot take up the toxicant, right? Then we have the pre-absorption metabolism, right? Pre-absorption metabolism means that sometimes the pollutant that you have in your body, okay, or the toxicant, it can be metabolized, okay, and if the metabolism is fast, then of course they are good and bad. If the metabolism of the toxicant is fast, it's good, but if the metabolism is fast for therapeutic drugs, right, so it's bad, right? So it depends on what kind of things that you want to metabolize in your body. So if for toxicant, of course, you want it to be eliminated as soon as possible. But if like for drugs, for treatment, okay, for example, if you are eating aspirin, right, in your body, some of the recommendation is that you have to take 2 or 3 per day, right? Reason is because we want to maintain a level of aspirin in your body. Okay, we don't want it to be like when you ingest it, then the next hour it is metabolized into something else. So we want to maintain at a certain level. So what we can do is we need to ingest it frequently. So one day maybe 3 or 4 tablets for the effects to be maximum, right? So one of the classical example of this exposure phase is this Ukrainian president, Victor. Yeah, he suffered from something called the dioxin poisoning. So he was exposed to dioxin through ingestion, right? He have a lot of political enemies, right? I think in 2000, right, around 2000, whereby he was invited to, if not mistaken, he was invited to a dinner, and then his enemy put in some dioxin, right, to his meal. Then after he ingested the dioxin, a few days later, he started to feel a bit different. And then after that, he starts to have a lot of problem with his body. So if you look at this photo, in July 2004, his face turned into something different, right? So to some extent, it was disfigured. So the dioxin that he ingests, it was determined in lab that this dioxin comes from somewhere. It is from human, right? It is not from nature because the concentration is too high, right? And of course, before his exposure, we don't know a lot on how dioxin can actually be distributed in our body, right? So after its exposure, investigation starts to be done, right? Be conducted to look into how dioxin can actually travel into our body. So this is a perfect opportunity that we have a human study, right? So they take his blood from everywhere, and then they find out, okay, the dioxin that he ingests, where did it go? Okay, to the liver, to the heart, to the face, and so on, right? So just to share with you, I have this video on how dioxin damage the human body. So let me just play this video so that you can actually see how this dioxin can damage our human body when we are exposed to it.
Excuse me, Dr. Wenda, did you already share the sound? Because we can hear the sound.
Oh, you cannot hear the sound. Sorry? Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, you're saying that you cannot hear the sound, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I'm not sure why you cannot hear the sound.
When you share, did you set it to also share sound?
Let me check.
No, not that one. It was on the Zoom one. The Zoom setting. Yeah.
The Zoom setting. Let me check. Share sound.
Yeah.
Let me see. Oh yeah, there's a share sound. So should I click share sound?
Yes.
Okay, I click already.
Okay.
Let me check.
The U.S. government employed Agent Orange.
Can you hear?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Foliant containing high levels of dioxin as a tactical weapon. Over a period of 10 years, 84 million liters of the defoliant were sprayed. During that time, 5 million people were directly exposed to the toxin. They absorb dioxin through their skin into their body. To this day, dioxin continues to be absorbed by Vietnamese people via their groundwater and the food, especially the animal fat that they ingest. Dioxin exposure can lead to serious health damage. Heart and brain damage, cancer of the liver, lungs, kidneys, intestines and bone marrow, plus chloracne, spasms, as well as neurological and mental health dysfunctions, and leukemia are only some of the consequences of dioxin. Over 3 million people suffer from these diseases. But the toxin's impacts become even more profound once it migrates into the human cell. The cell nucleus is protected by a membrane in order to disable molecules which are foreign to the body from entering the nucleus. Here, the dioxin combines with the AH receptor. This receptor is a protein which regulates the cell growth. The newly formed combination is then perceived as the body's own hormone and can therefore penetrate the protective barrier. Once inside of the nucleus, it activates DNA sequences and damages the genes. Since the war, over 150,000 Vietnamese children have been born with congenital malformations, which can be traced back to dioxin. Amongst these diseases are mental disability, orofacial cleft, facial asymmetry, stunted growth, deformations of the brain and the spinal marrow, as well as severe malformations such as deformed, misplaced, or missing extremities and organs.
So you can see that one of the side effects of this dioxin exposure is related to genetic problem, right? It can cause problem to our offspring, right? So this is something that is generational issues, because once you are exposed to it, then your offspring may carry this problem, and then the offspring may also have some effects from this. So it will cause a lot of issue to several generations, which is why exposure to this kind of chemicals should be limited. Otherwise, you will start to suffer from something like this president, right? This President Victor from Ukraine. Okay, so although he have fully recovered, so we don't know whether this dioxin can affect his sons, or maybe in his future sons, or maybe cause cancer to him, right? So okay, so that's exposure as part of the main toxicology phase. So the next one would be the toxicokinetics, whereby we talk about, the first one is the absorption phase. So when we talk about absorption, we are actually describing how our body can take up this toxicant, right? There are two different aspects, right? One is the cellular. We can talk about the absorption at the cellular level, whereby we are talking about how a toxicant can move into the membrane, our cell membrane, right? So our cell membrane has a lot of proteins. Consists of lipoprotein, right? Whereby it has a lot of receptors to control the movement of the molecules, right? In and out from the cell. So sometimes toxicant can actually be absorbed through the cell itself, right? The other one is we talk about the absorption through organism, whereby organism absorption relates to, for example, organ absorption, your tissue absorption, muscle absorption. This is at a larger scale compared to the cellular absorption. And then this absorption, it is sometimes through lipoprotein bilayer. It depends on membrane morphology, right? And then sometimes physical-chemical processes can actually govern the transmembrane movement. And also physical-chemical processes can also affect the absorption rate. Okay, and there are many different kind of physical-chemical characteristics of the pollutant on the toxicant itself can also affect how the toxicant move. One example, a classical example, as I mentioned, is the particle, right? Respiratory can cause respiratory disease. Particles such as very small particles, like if you look at the haze, right? Sometimes from the burning of chemicals, burning of plants, right? Sometimes when we burn the plants, there are a lot of this black color smoke, right? It consists of a lot of particles, right? So these particles, they are very, very small. Okay, it can be absorbed by our respiratory system when we breathe, right? So when we breathe, these particles can travel into our lung, right? And then after that, it can goes into our blood, and sometimes it can move around through our so-called the interstitial spaces, right, of our cell. So our cell, if you look at these two cells, right, there is some spaces between the cells whereby particles can actually move through it, right? So if you look at this photo over here, this is a classical example. I took it from Iron Man show, whereby this Iron Man, he was trapped somewhere I think in the Middle East, in the Middle East, and then someone, I think someone shoot him or something like that. I can't remember. And then he have a lot of particles in his body. And then after that, he designed something to put in his heart, right? And then you can see a lot of black things, right? Right. So all these, they are actually particles trying to travel to his heart. Okay, so this phenomena actually is quite true. Okay, sometimes these particles can also travel to the heart. Okay, it can travel all over the places. So another one example is that if you look at the news, right? Many years ago, got someone been shot. Okay, been shot by a shotgun, right? And the shotgun is actually consists of a lot of these bullets. If you look at the shotgun, right, if you shoot it, then it has a lot of these small bullets, which can actually penetrate into our body, right? And to remove all this is very difficult, right? So the news stated that someone was shot by this shotgun, and then these particles the small particles actually goes into the body, and it actually moves in the body from one place to another place, right? So this is one of the example of how physical-chemical characteristics of the particles itself can actually control how this it moves through the membrane, right? Through our cell. Okay, so other things like lipid, water solubility, ionization, functional groups, molecular size, conformation, all these will govern how a particular toxic moves in our body. So absorption phase, transmembrane movement follows a fixed law. Okay, it also can happen through filtration, which means through the aqueous pores. For example, if you have transmembrane, you can actually have certain molecules being transported, okay, into your cell through these pores. Okay, these pores are specialized pores whereby they are actually designed to transport certain solutes or molecules in and out from the cell. Okay, so we have also carrier-mediated transport. Okay, whereby, for example, you look at this diagram, right? You have ATP, right? ATP can actually move in and out from the cell. Okay, so a site of absorption, we have in animals, gastrointestinal tract, dermal, and lung. Plants, you have stomatopores, like I mentioned just now. This is part of the stomatopores, whereby you can actually have opening, right? This is in the leaf. Okay, if you look at the leaf, right, you have a lot of different cells, right, in the leaf, whereby except you have this leaf whereby you have this so-called stoma. Okay, this is a stoma. If you have a lot of water, of course, it will start to swell. So when it swells, then it can have some opening. Right, this opening can actually allows transport of your toxicant into the leaf itself. Then we have cuticle roots, and then insects, you have pore canals, oral, and then fish, you have gills, gastrointestinal tract, and also dermal. So these are all a site of absorption whereby you can have the transfer of the toxicant into the organism itself. Okay, so after being absorbed, okay, after absorption happens, the next thing that you will see is the distribution phase. Right, so distribution phase means that the toxicant itself is being distributed to many areas in our body. It can happen through our blood, okay? It can happen through our lymph fluid, okay? And if it's in plant, it can happen through xylem. Okay, xylem is a part of the plants that transport water through the to the whole plant itself. Okay, so there are 4 phases of distribution, right? First, you have the toxicant moving into the site of your target organ. Okay, so for example, if you talk about mercury, if you ingest mercury into your body, this mercury will be going into your central nervous system, right? That's the site of the toxic action from mercury. Then the other phase would be storage. Okay, when you ingest let's say dioxin, right? Dioxin travels to your body and it can be stored, right? It can be stored in your fats. It can be stored inside the adipose tissue, right? And then if you talk about lead or heavy metals, these heavy metals can be stored in your bone, right? So these are part of the classical issues, okay, the storage of the toxicant, which has happened since many years ago. People have already studied this kind of storage, and it has been causing a lot of problem, okay, which we will see later. What kind of problem storage can actually cause to a human or maybe to other organisms, right? So the other phase will be metabolism. Okay, the toxicant goes into your body and it goes to your liver, and then in your liver you can have a certain metabolism of the chemicals into something else, right? For example, if you look into drinking ethanol, right? Drinking ethanol into your body will cause its absorption by the GIT or gastrointestinal tract, and it goes to your liver, and then your liver will start to metabolize alcohol, okay, into something else. So if you drink methanol, you will have formic acid, okay, as part of the metabolism, right? So the other fate would be excretion, right? Toxicant that has been ingested, it goes into the body, and then it's filtered by your kidney, and then you excrete it out from your body, right? So one thing that organisms have learned over the years, right, is that we need a way to prevent this toxicant, okay, from destroying our body. So this is very useful. Nature has given us these barriers, right? Barriers of toxicological significance, whereby through evolution, we actually have this kind of barriers, blood-brain barriers, which prevent the toxicant from entering our brain directly. Okay, so our brain don't allow certain toxicant that are insoluble in water to enter into our brain. Okay, it depends, okay, on the molecule of the toxicant itself. Then we have this placenta, maternal and fetal placenta, whereby there's a clear separation, okay, between the fluid in the mother and the fetus, right? So this placenta is very unique because it allows only certain chemicals, beneficial chemicals, to be transported from the mother to the fetus. Then the other one is mammary, whereby we talk about the blood and milk. Okay, in young mother, maybe have given birth like 1 month or 2 months, you will see that the mother will have some milk, whereby this milk is actually something that has a lot of nutrient to the baby, and there's a barrier between the blood and milk. Okay, so the milk itself is not exposed to the blood. Okay, many other factors actually affecting the distribution, right? When we talk about distribution, we need to look into several things like affinity of tissues for xenobiotics, which means that whether a particular tissues have the receptors that can absorb these xenobiotics and have this toxic effect. So different organs in our body have different kind of receptors and response, right? This is why we see that when we ingest toxicant into our body, different organs behave differently, right? So it's because of the receptors that are available in the tissues and the organ for a particular xenobiotics. We also look into blood flow, okay? Blood flow to a particular organ, whether that organ is susceptible depends on how much toxicant is going into that organ itself. Okay, we also took into protein binding, which what I said just now in terms of the receptor. And then we also look into route of administration, which is part of the factors, okay, important factors that affects distribution a lot. So the route of administration concerns with the absorption, right? So absorption can happen through three means. One is through skin, through ingestion, and through the other one is respiratory ingestion, exposure. So for these three things, right, three different routes of administration. If you look at the guts, okay, gastrointestinal tract, okay, which is through ingestion, you eat something into your stomach and it gets absorbed, and then it goes to your liver, right? So ingestion itself is safer compared to when you have respiratory effect, okay, whereby when you breathe in the toxicant into your lung, then it goes to your blood, right? And then if you get exposed to a toxicant through your skin, right, it also goes into your blood, which means that this is one of the key factors that affects the rate of distribution, right? So we have the redistribution also. Redistribution means that we have this something called enterohepatic recirculation, whereby when you ingest something, this toxicant itself can actually travel to your liver. Okay, so it travels to your liver and then it gets detoxified. So in other words, what I'm trying to highlight here is that when you have a toxicant, right? If you ingest the toxicant itself, okay, it goes to your so-called intestine, right? It goes to your this smaller intestine, right? Whereby this intestine itself, it will absorb a lot of toxicant, which it will travel into your liver, right? So your liver itself is what we want the toxicant to travel to in the first place, because the liver is a powerhouse for metabolism. So it can detoxify quite a number of chemicals. So this is the reason why we want we want a lot of toxicant to go into the liver first. But if you go to the blood first, then it will be transported to the target organ more easily compared to if it goes to the liver first. So in the third phase of toxicokinetic will be metabolism phase. So in this phase, we talk about chemical reactions, right? We talk about how a particular toxicant can be converted to something else. For example, okay, look at this dioxin itself. Right? Dioxin is a chemical that is lipophilic, which means that it is not soluble in water. So if we want to improve the solubility of this dioxin, what we can do is that we can actually introduce OH group here, right, in this dioxin molecule, right? So in this metabolism phase, what we try to achieve, okay, what our body try to achieve is to convert the non-soluble chemicals into soluble form. For example, this dioxin, we want to add in more OH group into the dioxin so that it can be more soluble. So this metabolism phase wants to do this because in our body, we can actually excrete those that are soluble in water more easily compared to those that are not soluble in water, right? Because we have a kidney, and this kidney can actually help to excrete all those soluble toxicant, okay, through urine. So this is why in the metabolism phase, we try to look into how we can actually convert toxicant from the non-soluble form to the soluble form. So the other one is the conjugation. Sometimes there's a difficulty to convert the toxicant from the non-soluble to soluble. Sometimes we can have another chemical reaction through conjugation. Then through this effect, we can actually excrete the pollutant easier. But of course, another issue, okay, because our body is non-selective, our liver is not very selective in terms of the chemical reaction. This chemical reaction are all governed by something called a thermodynamic effect. So sometimes our body try to convert a particular toxicant into something that is soluble, but in turn, it is actually causing that particular toxicant to become more toxic. Okay, so it depends on what kind of toxicant that you have. Okay, so these are the factors that influence the toxicity. So one, we have this additive, okay, whereby we have 2 + 2 = 4. For example, 2 organophosphorus leading to cholinesterase inhibition. This one, we're actually talking about how these 2 different chemicals, when they interact together, they have additive effect, right? So the other one is synergistic. For example, CCl4, carbon tetrachloride, when it is ingested together with ethanol, okay, in our body, okay, it goes in our body, it can actually lead to something called a synergistic effect, whereby 2 + 2 you get 10. Okay, this it leads to hepatotoxicity, which means that issues with our liver. Okay, so the other one is potentiation, whereby 2 + 0 = 6. You ingest something that's non-toxic together with something that's toxic, you can have enhanced toxicity of that particular toxic element. Okay, so the last one will be antagonism. Okay, this one is you ingest something, for example, heavy metals into your body, and then you want to remove this heavy metal, you ingest another chemical, okay, for example, an antidote. Okay, then this heavy metals is actually been detoxified, right? So this is 2 + 2 = 0. This is a classical example of many antidote process. For example, snakes, right? If you have snakes, if the snake bite you, the snake inject a lot of toxin into your body. Then you go to the hospital will give you something to treat that particular venom, right, of the snake. So the venom itself, when you have this antidote, okay, it is in contact, and then it is actually having this antagonism effect, whereby 2 + 2 = 0. So last one would be the excretion. This is having the toxicological significance because excretion itself is one of the ways, okay, our body remove the toxicant effectively, right? So excretion can happen to all organic compounds, okay, almost all, right? But it depends on the structure itself also. So excretion can happen to drugs, okay, to toxicant, to anything, right? If you ingest antibiotics, right, after a few hours, you go to the toilet, and then you collect your urine, you send it for analysis, you'll see that your urine contains a lot of these antibiotics, right? So our body is very good in that. Okay, and this is one of the main pathway that we have to detoxify toxicant. So we have renal excretion, which is through our kidney. Okay, renal excretion is important because those water-soluble toxicant can be removed easily through renal excretion. Then we have non-renal excretion, which can be done by maybe liver, maybe our stomach, okay, for example, gastric secretion, okay, stomach acid, and so on. Then we have animals and plants have different kind of excretion mechanism. Okay, so for animals, as you know, we can actually excrete the toxicant through urine. For plants, you have different methods. For example, respiration. When they carry out respiration, they can actually remove certain toxicant. Okay, that's all for the what we call as the toxicokinetics. And then for toxicodynamics, we have dose response relationship. Toxicodynamics is concerning the ill effect. Okay, it's more on the ill effect of that particular toxicant. So you start off with the toxic chemicals, right? And then after that, you're going to look at the interaction with the target organ. Okay? The target organ itself has a lot of receptors. We're going to look at which receptors is the one that is most likely to bind with your toxic chemicals. And then we also look into how that particular target organ is changed, right? How it is affected. Okay, so for example, if you talk about nicotine, right? Nicotine is something that is found in cigarettes, right? So when we ingest nicotine into our body, it goes to our brain. Okay, our brain has a lot of neurons, whereby it can have these receptors to host all those nicotines. So what happens is that it can create some sensation, okay, some good sensation. So that's why when people take nicotine into their body, they start to feel good, okay, because of this issue. Then once they stop taking this nicotine, of course, you will have addiction, right? So in this toxicodynamic, we look into how the receptor respond to the nicotine and how it can be changed, right, to make the person become addictive, okay, to that chemical. Then we also look into the progression, how this response, what is the response if that person is addicted. So maybe his hand will be shaking, maybe he'll feel very cold, and so on. Okay. Okay, so just to go through in more detail on the absorption. Absorption, it can happen in 3 different areas. Okay, as long as the toxicant cross something called the epithelial cell barrier. Okay, it goes into our cell, it goes into our body. Then we can call it as absorption. There are three main places whereby absorption can happen, as what I have emphasized just now. One is through skin. Then we have the respiratory tract, and then we have the digestion, right? Digestion, whereby that means we consume that particular toxicant. So if you look at the this transdermal route, or what we call as intergumentary system route, which means through skin, right? Our skin itself has a lot of layers, right? We have epidermis layer, dermis layer, hypodermis layer. We have adipose layer, right? So the skin can actually act as the platform, okay, for that this toxicant to be absorbed and go into our blood vessel. Okay, so you can see a lot of products, right? Today they are designed so that we can actually ingest certain things through skin. Okay, I have a colleague. He is working on skin. He developed a patch, right? A patch whereby he can actually put a lot of different kind of drugs into that patch, and then he put that patch into the skin, and then the skin itself will absorb the chemicals. So he's doing that. He's doing that research. Right. Another one, very widely used, okay, things is what we call as a nicotine patch. Okay, I don't know whether you have heard of this nicotine patch or not. A nicotine patch is a patch. Okay, it is like a patch whereby you stick on your body, and then this nicotine get absorbed by the skin through your body. Okay, so this nicotine patch is actually been designed so that it can actually be absorbed by the skin itself. Yeah, so you actually stick something here, okay, containing the chemical, okay, and then this chemical can actually go into your epidermis, and then after that it goes down deeper, and it will go to your blood vessel. Okay, so this blood vessel itself will absorb the chemicals, and it will travel through your circulatory system, and then it will cause some effect to the target organ. Okay, another one example of skin absorption is this one, the beetle, right? This is one of the classical example whereby the beetle itself, okay, there's a certain kind of beetles can actually release certain toxin that can cause the skin to erupt. Okay, it can cause blisters, it can cause a lot of problems. For example, you can see this boy, right? He has something in his face here. Okay, this is caused by something called the Bombardier Beetles. Okay, this Bombardier Beetles, it has a certain chemicals in its body, quinone-based toxin. When you touch it, you can actually suffer. You can burn your skin. So this is an example of absorption. And then another one is this is very common in Southeast Asia. In fact, even my house, I find this a lot. Okay, every few days I can see that this bug will come to my house and walk around. And this is what we call as a Charlie bug. Okay, this Charlie bug, it has a chemical called pederine, okay, in its body, right? So this chemical can be absorbed by our skin, and it can burn our skin. Okay, after absorbed, it will burn. It will start to have a lot of blisters. For example, you can see this baby over here. You have a lot of blisters in his neck. Okay, this is from Charlie bug. So if you happen to see this bug in your house, don't touch it. Okay, don't touch this kind of bug, because if you touch it, then the chemicals will be released into your skin. Okay, and then after that, you will have this effect. And then we have the respiratory system, whereby we are actually looking into how the toxicant is absorbed through respiration. We have different kind of areas whereby absorption can happen. Okay, for example, you look at this respiratory tract. We have a nasal cavity, right? Or nasopharynx, whereby when you ingest something, it start to go into your nose, and then after a chemical goes into your nose, right here, absorption can happen anywhere. Okay, it can happen here, it can happen here, it can happen here, but most of the time, the majority of the toxicant absorption will happen around here, whereby you have your alveoli, whereby it is actually a thin layer membrane that separates outer environment with your circulatory system, right? So this alveoli itself can actually absorb a lot of toxicant, okay, and it goes directly to your blood. Yeah, this one. This is the part whereby you have a lot of reaction happening in the interface because it has very high surface area, right? So these are part of the so-called respiratory system areas whereby you can have absorption from the upper part of your breathing system to the lung itself. Okay. So the example of a lung, this is a bovine lung, whereby this is what you have as a bronchus. I think this is the bronchus, whereby it goes inside and then after it goes to the alveoli. Okay, alveoli itself here you have a lot. You look at the SEM or maybe some microscope. Okay, you look at the microscope itself, you will see that here you have a lot of different structures, very thin structures, whereby it allows the exchange of air with the circulatory system. Okay, this is a more zoom in image whereby you can see this is the bronchus. Okay, so this respiratory toxicosis is actually something that is quite concerning. Okay, usually respiratory issues or respiratory toxicant, it is airborne. Okay, most of the time we consider as airborne. And one very classical cases is this case in India, whereby we have the exposure of methyl isocyanide. In India, there's a factory, a manufacturing factory, whereby they have a lot of safety concern. Okay, in 1980 something, right? During that time, no one is paying attention to this factory, a manufacturing factory, and this manufacturing factory, they are actually dealing with a lot of different kind of very dangerous chemical, right? So one day something happened, and this manufacturing factory have some accidents, right? And this methyl isocyanide was released. Okay, it is actually consists of a lot of chemicals. It's precursors and methyl isocyanide and so on. A lot of different mixtures of chemicals, and this is released to the population, right? In this area, Bhopal in India. And because of this release, a lot of people start to breathe in this kind of chemicals into their body. So this is one of the example of what you call as a respiratory toxicosis, whereby once they have ingested this through respiratory routes, right, then they start to have a lot of effects to their body. Okay, the concentration is very high. Okay, at that time, I think it's too high for a human to take in to their body. So they suffer from blindness, they suffer from death, they suffer from nausea and so on, right? So this has caused a lot of issues to that area at the time. Not only 10,000 was killed, but I think about 30 to 40,000 people was injured. Okay, the other one would be, another example would be what we call as the microwave popcorn factory in US. Okay, this is another example whereby respiratory uptake of the chemical was occurred. Okay, it was something that is quite serious. This one is there are a lot of workers in this popcorn plant. Okay, this popcorn plant, they deal with a lot of different chemicals, right? One particular chemicals of interest is this one, the diacetyl. Okay, whereby this chemical is actually the butter flavor. They use this chemical to produce the butter flavor to to the popcorn. Okay, they have this popcorn they put in. Then when we eat it, then we have this feeling of butter flavor characteristics, right? So what happens is that a lot of people are exposed to this kind of chemicals, right? So if we take in a bit, okay, maybe like 10 grams of popcorn, 1 kilogram of popcorn is still okay, but these workers, they're exposed to these chemicals every day at a higher concentration. So what people observe is that people who are working in this popcorn plant suffers from a lot of coughing and respiratory problems and so on. Not only one, most of the people who work in this plant, they suffer from these issues. So they start to carry out investigation, and they found that in this popcorn plant, there are a lot of VOCs. Okay, VOC means volatile organic carbon in the air, with the main composition being this diacetyl. Okay, so after this episode of a problem with the workers, what happens is that they start to implement more safety measures, right? They build a lot of specialized areas for them to package this popcorn, okay? Because if they don't do that, then this particular chemical will cause a lot of harm to the workers. One more is this nicotine. Okay, this nicotine is a chemical that has caused a lot of issues, right, all over the countries, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in the world. Okay, nicotine is regarded as something that is toxic, right? But of course, there's no regulation because it's very hard to do it, right? Very hard to ban nicotine from the population, because everyone is using this nicotine, smoking, and maybe as a nicotine patch, nicotine gum, right? So very hard to eliminate the effect of nicotine. So nicotine is part of the chemical, okay, that can be administered through respiratory tract, right? So you smoke, then it becomes airborne, right? You have a lot of smoke, right? It goes in your lung, and then your lung will absorb the nicotine itself, and then it will travel to your brain, right? So if you take nicotine patch, okay, that means you paste it in your body, your skin, then this nicotine will go into your circulatory system directly. If you ingest, okay, some people ingest nicotine gum, right? So this nicotine will go to your intestine, and then after that it will travel to your target organ. Okay, so I don't think I'll show this. Okay. The other one is digestive system. Okay, digestive system is our mouth until our anus, right? So these are all considered digestive system. We have a mouth, oral cavity, esophagus, up to anus. Right? And then when we ingest something, these chemicals can travel everywhere, right? It can travel to oral cavity, esophagus, and absorption can happen everywhere, right? It's not limited to only mouth, okay? This absorption can actually happen in rectum, in intestines, in anus, in stomachs, right? So the resident time can determine the site of toxicant entry. Okay, sometimes if you have absorption in your mouth, then the residence time is short. If you have in small intestine, that means the residence time, okay, is long. That means it takes longer to have the effect, to suffer from the effect. So one of the classical chemical related to digestive system is this chemical, what you call as a capsaicin. Capsaicin, yeah, capsaicin. Oh, I can't remember how to pronounce the name, right? So this is a chemical that can be found in chili. Okay, chili is like a plant that we like to eat a lot. Okay, it gives a hot sensation, right? So this chili, if you ingest it, you will feel like it will cause a lot of burning sensation in your mouth, sometimes in your stomachs and in your intestine, right? So chili can actually, the chemicals from chili can actually be absorbed right? From your body, from your mouth up to your anus. Okay, so it can actually be absorbed. But of course, we shouldn't take this chemical too much, right? This capsicum, right? We shouldn't take too much because it is actually a neurotoxin, right? At high concentration, it can actually cause neurological effect to your neurons, right? So yeah, gastrointestinal tract, from your tongue, from your mouth, up to your intestine. Okay, so all this absorption can happen. Okay, so digestive system, you can have a different kind of areas whereby absorption can happen. It can happen at the mucosa, submucosa, whereby you have a different kind of structures that allows absorption to happen. So if you look at the one particular area is the small intestine, whereby you have villi and microvilli. These are the finger-like structure. Okay? Example here, you have this finger-like structure, right? Whereby absorption can happen very, very intensely, right? Okay, one example of this absorption is pesticide food poisoning. This is in 1985, whereby several people, they purchase watermelon, okay, from this area, California. And then after purchasing this watermelon, they consume it. And after consuming, they start to feel like there's nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and then sweating, and then excessive tearing, muscle fasciculation, and a lot of effects. Okay, they suffer from a lot of effects from that watermelon itself. Okay, then they did some study. Okay, people did some study to see what kind of chemical trigger this kind of effects, and they found that the watermelon has been dosed with this chemical called Acute. Okay, this is actually an insecticide, and the reason why the farmer use this chemical is because for them, they have no knowledge in toxicology. They use this chemical and they found that the watermelon grows bigger and better, right? It grows very big. Then, of course, bigger watermelon means more profit for them. So they don't care about the toxicology part. They sell it, and then unfortunately people consume it and they start to have effects, right? So the effects itself has caused a lot of issues. Okay, people start to question why this particular chemical can be used for growing watermelons. And of course, this is a classical example of what we call as a pesticide food poisoning due to ingestion, right? So we have looked at the three different ways whereby absorption can happen. So things don't stop at absorption. Okay, so once it's absorbed to our body, the next thing will be to distribute it. Okay, the toxicant has to be distributed, and it has to reach our target organ. So absorption can happen through skin, lung, and intestinal tissue. Okay, after that, after it is absorbed, the next thing will be, it will be transported somewhere through something called the interstitial fluid, intracellular fluid, or blood plasma, right? Interstitial fluid means that you have the fluid that is not in blood. Okay, you have a liquid that is not blood. Then we have intercellular fluid, whereby you have things like blood, right? And then we have blood plasma, right? So the toxicant is absorbed and enter the lymph or blood supply. Okay, it can enter this, and once it enters into these two, right, it becomes mobilized. Right? Mobilized means that it is able to go into other parts of the body. Okay, this is not desirable because if it goes to the target organ, then it causes toxic effect to the target organ, right? So it depends on the which this toxicant enters. If it goes to the lymph, right, which means lymphatic fluid, in the lymphatic system. For example, lymph capillaries, nodes, tonsils, spleens, and so on, right? It goes to the lymphatic system. It is slow circulation, okay? And if it's slow circulation, that means the toxicant distribution is slower, okay? It doesn't reach the intended target organ that quickly. If it goes to the cardiovascular system, okay, this is the blood, and that means you are going to the heart, arterial, vessels, capillaries, blood. This is something that is of concern because for cardiovascular system is a pressurized system, which means that it is very fast. The circulation is fast. It is within seconds. Okay, it can reach a target organ, and major distribution of the toxicant usually is by blood. Okay, by your blood, because it's fast. Okay, it's pressurized system. Most of the toxicant will go into the blood itself. So there are many kind of species in blood. Okay? You have erythrocyte, leukocyte, platelet, and plasma. You have also a lot of different kind of proteins. For example, this human serum albumin. This is a kind of protein that can actually have a lot of sites for binding, which means that if you have a toxicant, this toxicant itself can be attached to this albumin, and then it's transported everywhere in your body. Okay, this is one of the mechanisms of transport, right? There's a attachment, okay, of the toxicant to a particular cell, okay, like albumin, okay, or maybe like red blood cell, white blood cell, and so on. So the other one is the toxicant travel by itself. Okay, this is more unlikely, right? Most of the time it will be attached to certain proteins or chemicals. So depending on the areas whereby the toxicant enters, okay, it will affect the toxicity. If you look at digestive system, usually in digestive system, you go to the small intestine, it get absorbed, and it carries the toxicant directly to the liver. Okay, so it goes to the liver, and the liver will detoxify the chemicals, right, easily. If it goes through the respiratory system, in the respiratory system, we look into blood circulation. Okay, it goes directly into your blood, or what I call as pulmonary circulation. So when it goes to blood, then of course it's much more tougher if you want to remove it from our body. Okay, so if you look at this respiratory system, generally it is a good means to introduce a certain vaccine. Okay, I don't know whether you have heard of this before. Recently, we have this news whereby certain countries like China, they are looking into injecting this vaccine, COVID vaccine, using this respiratory system. So in other words, they want to create something. Okay, in fact, they have already created that. To create something that when you actually breathe in this thing, right, it goes to your body, it goes to your lung, and then you are vaccinated, right? So in China, they have this airborne vaccine, I think. I don't know what it's called, but it's actually using respiratory system to absorb the vaccine itself, right? And then after absorption, it can go to your circulation, and then it can cause the same effect like the one that you use for injection, right? So injection is directly to your blood, but of course, if you use it through respiratory system, it can also go to your blood, but with certain limitation, because if you use respiratory system to deliver the vaccine, right, you still have to pass through the layers, the thin layers of your alveoli, right, in your lungs, right? So that will be one of the challenges. But of course, since China has already commercialized that kind of vaccine, then I believe they have already solved this kind of problem. The other one site would be the percutaneous. Yeah, this one. This one is the entries through skin. Okay, entries through skin means that like the nitrogen patch that I mentioned just now. Okay, when you have these chemicals entering to your skin, it goes directly to your blood supply. So these two, respiratory and skin, right, is actually less desirable entry. It can cause more toxic effect compared to if you go through the toxicant go through by digestive system, right? Whereby after going to the digestive system, the first site it goes is the liver, which is desirable. Okay, factors affecting distribution, physical chemical properties, concentration gradient, which affects the volume of distribution. And then we have cardiac output to specific tissues, detoxification reaction, tissue sensitivity, and barrier that inhibits migration. So generally, the factors involved, they are more onto how much of this toxicant is going into the target organ. Okay, and then whether the target organ have sufficient receptors to bind with the toxicant. Okay, and then is there any restriction? Okay, for example, any barriers that prevents the toxicant from going into that target organ. So generally, all these are the factors that affects distribution. So as I mentioned just now, some of the toxicant can actually bind with certain proteins like albumin, right? So when it's bind with this kind of protein, it can actually be distributed all over the body, because our body recognizes that kind of protein as one of its own, okay, one of the safe protein. Okay, so when the body recognizes this, then of course there will be no attack of that protein. Our white blood cell will not be identifying that as our enemy, right? So it will travel all over the place until it reaches the target organ, right? So this kind of binding actually affects the distribution and the half-life. Okay, sometimes the half-life can be higher because it is actually protected by the protein that is it is attached to, right? So these are the distribution, the body fluid in our body. So you can see that our body fluid is most of it is cell water, plasma water, and so on. Right? So the distribution can happen by this kind of transport, because all our body is fluid, right? So we can actually have a toxicant being distributed from cell water, plasma water to everywhere. Okay, so as I mentioned, we like the distribution to go to the liver, because liver can detoxify, right? We want this kind of route, because the liver itself has a lot of enzyme. It can undergo metabolism, right? So we have something called this enterohepatic circulation, whereby this okay, so the chemical actually goes into the gastrointestinal tract, and then it goes to the liver, and then sometimes the liver can actually send back the pollutant into the gastrointestinal tract, right? So this is something that can be good and can be bad, because this is like liver can actually detoxify, okay, detoxify your pollutant and your toxicant, but if it's sent back, then you can actually increase the risk of exposure, right? So just some images of your liver, okay. Okay, so distribution endpoint model concerns with how a toxicant is distributed in the body. So this one is that if you have a toxicant itself, okay, you can actually be stored. Okay? It goes into the body. It is stored in the bone, in the adipose tissues, in your liver. And this storage itself is something that can be good, can be bad. Okay. The good thing is that when you store this good chemicals, then it's okay, right? If you store toxicant in your body, for example, lead. Okay, if you have lead in your body, you may be exposed to lead in the future. when your bone, for example, your bone, right? Your bone is a storage place for your lead. If you have osteoporosis, okay, whereby your bone starts to wear off, okay, you will have this lead being introduced into your body at higher concentration. Your toxicant can actually be biotransformed. Okay, it can go into your liver, and then it can be transformed into something that is less toxic. Okay, and it can be transformed into metabolite. Okay, and after that, it can be excreted. And the worst case would be toxicant interacting with the cells. And when it interacts with the cell, you have the effects, right? The effects from the interaction, which can come in different ways. If it's kidney, then your kidney may fail. If it's central nervous system, then your central nervous system may have certain problem. For example, you may be shaking all the time because of the failure or damage in the central nervous system. Right. Storage. Okay. Storage means the accumulation of tissues in a specific tissues. The toxicant accumulation of toxicant in the specific tissues. Okay. So that means your toxicant can bind with many in many areas, can be stored and bind. For example, in bones we have heavy metals. In liver, and in kidneys, in fats, and so on. So our body likes to store chemicals, right? So all these toxicants can be potentially stored in our body. One example of storage is this chicken. Okay, chicken in California. I think it's in California. I'm not sure of the location. This is a place whereby they breed a lot of chicken, right? And in this area, they want to maximize profit. So what they did was they put the chicken in a cage, right? A very confined cage. And then after that, they try to make the condition to mimic certain condition whereby the chicken can actually produce a lot of eggs, right? So they force the chicken to start to produce a lot of eggs, okay? So that the chicken keeps producing a lot of different eggs for the company, okay? This is a hen, right? Yeah. So basically, when you have a lot of egg production by the chicken or by the hen, what you will see is that the chicken will start to exert a lot of pressure, right? The pressure to its bone, right? So the bone itself will start to be less stable, okay? The stability will be reduced, okay? And then eventually the bone itself will start to collapse, okay? Fractured or become very weak, right? So what happens is that all these hens, right? They ingest their feedstock, okay? The feed, and the feed that is provided to them consists of certain trace elements, like for example, lead and vanadium. So all this lead and vanadium is actually accumulated in the hen's bones, right? So as they produce a lot of these eggs, right, their bone density starts to decrease, and when this happens, all those leads in their bones starts to come up, right? So because of this, right, they suffer from the effects of the lead, right? Lead and vanadium. It was detected in their blood. Okay, 20% of the hens were killed or died because of the high blood lead and vanadium. So this is one of the reasons how this lead can actually come out from the bone. Another one example. Okay, this is something that I'm quite familiar with. Okay, because I also have this kind of problem, right? This is a 37 years old smoker with a history of exposure to lead. Okay, which means that this female actually been exposed to the lead during her childhood, right? Her childhood probably have a lot of problem, right? And then we have this pica issue. Pica issue means that this female smoker during the young age, she likes to eat a lot of dirt. Sometimes children like to take in dirt into their body. They just ingest and just eat and eat and eat, right? And then we also have paint chips, right? Lead paint chips. So all this lead goes into the this person's body, and then it is stored in the bone, right? So after many years, okay, what happens is that this woman starts to suffer from something called the hyperthyroidism. Okay, this woman has hyperthyroidism, and this hyperthyroidism actually is a disease, a thyroid hormone disease, whereby it causes certain effects. For example, the bone mass to be reduced. Okay, so hyperthyroidism can cause the bone mass to be reduced, and then because of this disease, all those leads that has been stored in the woman's, the female workers, senior smokers' bone has been released, right? So because of this, the woman starts to have effects from the hypothyroidism and also the lead problem. So this is an example whereby if you have storage in your body, you have certain chemical toxicant storage in your body, one day it may come out from that storage and it may cause ill effect. If you have dioxin in your body, the dioxin may be stored in your adipose tissue, and one day when you are thinner, this dioxin may come out from the adipose tissue and you may suffer from the effect. So if you look at this female worker, right, during her young age, she was exposed to the lead at low concentration, right? But then the problem is that the lead accumulated in her bone, right? So as she grows older and she have hyperthyroidism, the lead itself that has accumulated in her bone start to come out at a higher concentration. So that means this lead is no longer at low concentration. It starts to come out at very high, up to 150 to 250 microgram per gram, which is very excessive. It causes a lot of issues, right? So these are some of the examples of storage. Okay, so if we look into GI tract exposure will send it to the liver, and for this kind of exposure, this is something that of course goes to the liver, and then you have detoxification, something that is more desirable. Toxic effect is lower compared to when you have direct contact with the blood. One case study of injection would be this sheep exposed to copper sulfate feed. I'm not sure whether this is deliberate or not intentional, but then once this sheep was exposed to copper sulfate, you can see that the sheep actually have a lot of effects. Okay, this sheep have something called the acute hemolytic crisis, whereby it has something called a jaundice and red blood cell failure and so on, right? So it affects a lot of things like fertility and the health of that particular this feedstock. Sorry, these animals. Okay, so this sheep looks very sad. Okay, you can see very sad, and then it is not very healthy. Okay, and it has a certain disease called the gunmetal kidney, and you can see the eyes here is yellowish. This is from jaundice, right? So we have barriers, blood-brain barriers, placental barriers, which is very good to slow the toxicant's passage, so that we can actually prevent them from being distributed. Okay, so before I end, just want to show the another example. This is a very famous example that affects a whole city, right? This is an example that happens in Michigan, 1973, whereby they have this something called a Bbb contamination. So what happens during that time was that that there was a factory, a manufacturing factory in the US, and they labeled the chemical wrongly. So chemicals consisting of Bbb was mixed up with the feed. Okay, they also manufactured something for the cows, for the cattle, but then of course they label it wrongly. They send Bbb to the farmers instead of the feed, right? So when this Bbb was sent to the farmer did not know that this is Bbb. They did not know that this is toxic because it looks the same as their feed, right? So they fed the cows and all those livestock with the Bbb. And then after a few months, they start to see that their cows is having problems standing. Some of the cows is very sick, some died. Then they start to suspect that something is wrong. Okay, so but then this can only be known. Okay, the effect can be known after like many months. Okay, so from the first day when they feed it until when they detect it, it's already a few months. So that means that all those livestock has been into our human food chain, right? So you can see, okay, so once this so-called livestock has been exposed to Bbb, and then it goes to our human food chain, and then human will start to suffer from the effect, right? So humans suffer from the effect, cattle, swine, sheep, all also suffer from the effect of these issues, right? This problem. And then eventually, of course, a lot of people start to complain that they have a lot of ill effect in their body. Some people complain they have nausea. All this because of the exposure to the Bbb, right? So you can see from this example, one particular problem, okay, with the cows, with the livestock, right, has caused a whole city to be in serious crisis, right? Because the cows, the cattle, all this affects the food, again, the food chain, right? So human unintentionally been exposed to this Bbb, and then after that we start to complain, right? Complain of a lot of problems and so on. So this is not just 1973 issues. Even after 20 years, we can see that they still detected the Bbb in the livestock, in the samples, in many different kind of sampling, right? Different areas. For example, this is a half-life for serum in the woman. Okay, in human, they detected this Bbb in the woman. Okay. So this is an incident that has caused panic to the area, to the city, right? And of course, a lot of lawsuit has happened, right? So this is just an example whereby ingestion can actually cause a lot of issues, okay? From ingestion from the cows up to the issues in the human. Okay, so I think that's all from me today. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, can you just let me know so that I can try to answer? I don't see any questions in the chat yet.
Yeah, not yet, yeah. So to all students and participants, if you have any questions due to the lectures, please feel free to raise your questions. You can open your microphone or type your question in the chat box. So Dr. Wenda, regarding to the lectures, you mentioned about the metabolism phase, which is it consists of phase 1 and phase 2.
Oh, yes.
In particular, regarding to the phase 1, that majority occur via bioconversions. So could you please give more, how to say, example of reactions, that involved in the bioconversion? Maybe the student maybe need to know. Yeah.
So okay, sure. Yeah. So for this bioconversion, actually we are going to go through this metabolism part next week. Whereby we'll cover, we'll cover what exactly is this metabolism and how we can actually convert the chemicals from one to another, because this is more related to chemistry. So just to highlight the example, usually this bioconversion happens when we want to try to convert these chemicals to something that is more water soluble, because the liver itself is something that is very good in detoxifying chemicals. From the example that I give just now is in terms of the methanol, right? Methanol itself, when we ingest the methanol into our body, it goes to our into our intestine, and then intestine will send it to the liver directly. So when it goes to the liver, then this methanol itself will be metabolized. It can be converted into formic acid, right? But then this formic acid is toxic, right? If it's methanol, it's toxic. But if it's ethanol, it is less toxic, right? So this is an example of this conversion, bioconversion. So we not only this kind of conversion, of course, we also have a different kind of conversion, like addition of certain functional groups, addition of combination of certain molecules together. These are some of the chemical reactions that can happen in the liver. Another example would be, this is not example, this is just maybe like I can show it here. It's like what we expect to happen. Like just now, is the addition of OH group, right? So this is dioxin itself. Some of the OH group can be attached. Our liver can actually do this bioconversion, whereby it can actually oxidize this molecule with the OH group to a selected area, like here. Then through this addition of hydroxyl group, you can actually increase the solubility of this dioxin. Then after that, it will go to our kidney, and then we can actually release it out. So we also have another one is the conjugation, whereby we can actually have attachment of certain molecules to the toxicant itself, which is then going to make it different in terms of the characteristics.
So the clue is to convert from the, hydrophobic to more hydrophilic,
this is one of the tasks for the liver. But of course, during conversion, right, sometimes our liver cannot convert it from toxic to less toxic. Sometimes the toxic one becomes more toxic. So this is because when we talk about this kind of reaction, it is actually a chemical reaction that is driven by thermodynamics, right? So whatever that converts it into something that is less stable or more stable must follow the thermodynamics law. So that's why sometimes you can have it more toxic, sometimes it's less toxic. Right?
I see. And there is the question from
I saw questions about absorption in some case. Why when taking absorption pill only give toxic effect to the baby without killing the mother? Okay, if you ask me about this question, I would say that in terms of the tolerance, right, baby's tolerance compared to the mother is very different. So this is in terms of the muscle mass, right? In terms of the weight, okay, in terms of weight. If you look at toxicology, we always look into per kilogram, right? We talk about how many gram per kilogram of the tissue of the organism, right? So this, if you take certain pills, right, absorption pill, right, into our body, the mother itself may also have certain toxic effect, but will not suffer from it because the body mass is very big. Okay, it's larger than compared to the baby. So when it goes to the baby, then because of the lower mass, it is exposed to this pill more, and then it has more effects. Right? That's my answer to this question. Right.
Ranga, any other question?
But thanks for the question.
It's a good question, I guess.
Yeah.
Still any question from students or other participants? I'm wondering, with the example that you just exposed in the beginning of the lectures, according to the dioxin toxicity, from the example, so seems the toxicity effect that occur on the adult and baby, or what to say, even in the preconception condition, were different. For example, if the exposure occurred since the baby is still in the mother, how to say, mother lamb, and then it can cause a significant effect on the genetic, right? But in case of the adult, that you give the example for the president of Ukraine, yeah, he was exposed.
Oh, okay, yeah, dioxin effect is it is actually able to affect the offspring is because it is altering the genetics. It alters the DNA of the parents. So when you ingest dioxin into our body, what happens is that it is actually able to be distributed everywhere in our body. So it goes to our liver, it goes to our fat tissues. It can be stored in there in the fat tissues. So to some extent, it can travel into our cell, and then after that, it can alter certain DNA in our cell. So that when this happens, then of course, indirectly, you can actually cause genetic problem to your offspring. But of course, if like pregnant women, okay, they're exposed to this kind of toxicant dioxin, right? Generally, the human body, right, we have this barrier, placenta barrier, whereby mother and fetal, we can actually have a barrier that prevents dioxin from traveling through it. But then, of course, this can only slow down the passage. You cannot like 100% make sure that dioxin did not travel through that placenta barrier. So because of this, the children will suffer from the effect if the mother is exposed when she's pregnant. Yeah. So that's the reason why we see that this dioxin can actually cause a lot of harmful effect to the population.
But in case of the adult, seems the toxicity effect looks like reversible.
Oh yeah, the president, the Ukraine president was exposed to it, but the exposure dose was not high enough to kill him. It was at the dose whereby a lot of signs poisoning effect starts to happen. But I'm not sure about the intention of his enemy. I don't know whether his enemy wants to kill him or wants to just to make him suffer. But I doubt they just want to make him suffer. Yeah, because you can see, from what I know is that the dose given to that president was not at a lethal dose. Right, it was at a dose whereby you can see his face start to be disfigured, and then
recover,
yes, for a couple of years. But it's the poison is good enough to put him out from the politics.
I see.
Oh yeah, I saw a question. I want to ask about the metabolism phase. Does the genetic factors can make the toxicity more or better? Yes, of course. In terms of metabolism, if we talk about metabolism, right, of toxicant, one of the key issues will be genetics. Genetics plays a crucial role in everything, right? It affects your, for example, thyroid. Okay, if we talk about thyroid, everyone have a thyroid, right? So this thyroid can actually produce hormone, right? These hormones can actually affect metabolism. So if your gene says that your thyroid is not going to function very well, then of course your metabolism will be affected. So if your gene says that your liver is going to be poor, then of course you will have problem with your metabolism as well, right? So genetic factors is something that we cannot control, but it is playing a very, very important role in determining whether this particular individual has the receptor to bind with the toxicant and to have the ill effect or not. So this is what I know. This is my answer. Yes, it will cause the individual to be either hyposensitive or hypersensitive to a particular toxicant. Yeah.
Depend on the tolerance level, yeah?
Yeah, it depends on the tolerance. But genetic factor is always something that
very typical, yeah?
It's going to be a main factor. We cannot run away from it. Yeah. So that's why it's good, because we have a variation of people who, some people are very tolerant to certain things, some people are less tolerant to certain things. But then, of course, when we talk about this hyposensitive and hypersensitive, right? We're actually talking about to a selected chemical. Okay, for example, some people may be hypersensitive to paracetamol, but hyposensitive to aspirin, while the other may be the other way around. So we can have a lot of this variation, which is good because, yeah, then we have a population that is tolerant to certain toxicant. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Do you have any question, dear student? Yeah. Actually, we already passed from the schedule. All right, Adani, thank you.
Thank you.
So if you still have any questions, you can, how to say, write your questions. And in the next lecture, yeah, Dr. Wenda, before we start for the fourth lecture, you can, how to say, discuss, yeah, with Dr. Wenda.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it would
or
be
you can
also
email it to
possible.
me.
Yeah,
you can also,
very
or
much.
you can WhatsApp to me also. I'm
Yeah,
okay
I will
to,
share your
yeah.
WhatsApp to my students.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So you also can, how to say, really to discuss with Dr. Wenda about the lecture. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right, everyone. And Dr. Wenda, thank you very much for your very comprehensive lectures and very insightful. The interesting thing is you always provide the good examples. Yeah. Then make, how to say, the good understanding for students, I guess, to how to say, to understand the concept that delivered in every lectures. So thank you very much for your great effort for today, and we will have the next lectures at the same schedule next week. And for the assignment, you have to mention something, Dr. Wenda, before we close?
The assignment for next week, I will start to give assignment, right? And the assignment will the first assignment will consist of a question and answer only. So I want to see the understanding of the students on all these topics that has been taught 2 weeks ago. So I want to see how is the understanding, and from the understanding itself, I can actually see what I can do to help the student to understand better in the future lectures. So it will be question and answer. The number of questions I have not decided yet, but hopefully the students who is taking this course will answer all the questions. It will be like a 2 weeks deadline, right, for the assignment. I don't know whether it will be graded or not. I'll discuss with.
We can
grade. Okay, that will be good. Yeah. If it's graded, then everyone will be more serious in doing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's all. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for the explanations of the assignments. Next week, Dr. Wenda will deliver that assignment. And yeah, very looking forward to all of you to see you again in the next lectures. And I do hope a great day and also very great health. See you again next week, everyone. Thank you very much for your great attention. Okay, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, wish you a great day. Okay, thank you. So for all students, since we still have another lecture, do we need to have a break before the lectures? Actually, my throat getting so difficult to release the sounds. So
I think you're the one who need a break, not the student.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know if we better to directly continue to the lecture. If Hafid can replace me, for the analytical environmental chemistry, it would be great. But how to say, I just want to check ini untuk student semuanya, jam siang masih ada schedule nggak? Kuliah?
Ada, Ibu.
Oh, ada jam?
Jam 1.
Oh, I guess it's difficult ya. Oke, kalau begitu kita break dulu sebentar ya. Jam 9 kita mulai. Dan ini kan hostnya Pak Hafid. Pak Hafid, terima kasih untuk ini menyiapkan Zoom-nya dan mohon nanti bantuannya untuk record ya. Saya kira di keperluan untuk laporan program. Saya kira ini bisa di close dulu mungkin ya Pak Hafid.